what is the motivation for the modern art movement to make non-beautiful art? People seem agreed in general that this art is vapid and sort of ugly, but why isn't there more motivation to change it? Well, this is going to be part of the story of this series of episodes, and I think it has to do with exactly the thing that I said at the beginning, which is this notion that there is a divine standard, and that we're not just inventing stuff out of our own heads. Now, human invention and imagination, as I've been saying, right, has an important role to play, but it's not the only role to play in art. And I think that once you lose the idea that there is a purpose behind the way things are, behind the way our lives are shaped, behind the way creation works, behind science and how the material laws of the universe work, right, behind the formation of our minds, right? If once you lose the idea that all of that is constructed with a design in mind, then it becomes purely about what humanity can invent, and eventually, people get kind of bored, right? They get bored with just reproducing stuff that they see in the world, and they want to kind of strike out towards something different. But there may be nothing different, right, than God's creation, and so it is true that eventually, as I said, forms exhaust their potentiality, their possibilities. This will be the story that we tell as we go into the Byzantine period with some of the mosaics that come from that era, right? That does happen. And when that happens, probably what it means is that God is calling us to a new way of seeing his order, right? So there's some sort of new form that's coming into being, or new medium. But the problem is that if you go into that new medium without a sense that you're doing something, that you're recreating or reflecting back at God and at your fellow man, the nature of divine order, then you're just going to end up kind of doing whatever makes you feel pleasurable at a given time. And you see artists doing this now all the time. You see people like throwing stuff at walls and dripping, this is why people do this stuff, like tape bananas to walls and drip paint all over the floor. There is a certain randomness to it because it's an effort essentially to move away from form. I mean, that's what abstraction is, right? It's sort of an attempt to deny some of the inherent structure in the world. And my suggestion would be that, as we go forward into a new era of digital art, which we are doing, right? And as we talk about video games, as we talk about even like some of the stuff that people are just making using digital technology, old paintings that are kind of redone and revitalized in digital art, or paintings in the old style that are enhanced with digital technology, right? Our goal is going to be recovering that sense that this new tech too has a purpose, has a telos, and that criterion or that touchstone of excellence is, I think, what we're missing. With a sense that you think that art is just a kind of art for art's sake, it's a thing for itself. But this is a very unusual and modern idea that art is just this thing that we kind of do because it brings us pleasure. The truer idea is that art is informed by our entire philosophy of the world, right? The heavens declare the glory of God. That one sentence from the Psalms is enough to kind of describe how art, ought to work. Because if indeed the physical stuff around us is so formed as to reflect God at us, then we must be so formed with each new medium as to reflect the infinite abundance of God back at him. And so if you don't have that idea, right, it all, I'm afraid to say, does come back to God, right? Like, why would we move away from doing that? Well, only if we felt that like that was somehow wrong, that we wanted to reject the notion that there's an inherent form in the world, and that instead we wanted just to kind of muddle up the forms and make something that resists any neat interpretation. And that is kind of the movement of some of this modern abstraction. And some of it can be powerful. I grant. It's not like it has no value at all. I happen to kind of like Pollock and Rothko, but in its essence, right, the problem is not that it doesn't necessarily always give me pleasure or that I don't always enjoy it. The problem is that the philosophy behind it is bad, and it's a degrading philosophy that will eventually degrade the products of the human imagination. And so God is always the key. It's always going to be God that gives the shape to the world that we then invest into new forms of art. So there are people who are doing that. I mean, conservatives are making art, and not just conservatives, because it's not really just about a political thing, but people that, are connected to some idea of order in the world are doing this. But it takes time, right, to recover that sort of thing. And it takes effort.